Okay, I just wrapped up um, Antietam from the blue and gray deluxe edition from Decision Games. This is a pretty nice package that Decision Games has put together. Um, Usually, Decision Games can be, hit and miss with some of their designs, particularly the magazine games. Um, this is a quad, actually more than a quad in this case. It's got 8 battles in it. It's a combination of blue and gray, both 1 and 2 from the old SPI days. So this is a very old system. It is extremely simplified. The super simple CRT, simple command or not even command, but movement and combat rules. There are command rules that are optional, but the main rules are like maybe 8 pages. Yeah, it's 8 pages, and one of those pages is the cover and the table of contents. So it's almost more like 6, 2, 4, 6 pages of rules. There are a number of game specific or battle specific rules. Antietam had a couple of optional rules, like the Union artillery being immobile but having a longer range. There were some things like Greater Union Initiative, Total Union Initiative, where you can move the whole army at your leisure, which would make for not a very competitive game. Although, as you can see from the way this map looks, I kind of ended up with a fairly uncompetitive game in the long run. I didn't use any of these, except I used the optional reinforcement rules to bring on the additional 5th Corps units. The 5th Corps starts with some units down here, but there's others that come on. So those guys ended up coming on but never activated. And then I used this recovery of attack effectiveness capability. So anytime you got a attacker retreats result, which was where you flip your counters over to the parentheses side, usually you couldn't recover that. Well, it means that they can't attack. They can no longer attack or move into an EZOC. But this allows them on a roll of a 1 at the start of every movement phase for your side. If you roll a 1 for each of those units, they can flip back over to their functional side. So that came in pretty handy. Although so the nice thing about this rule set is it also includes, once you get through all of the battle specific rules, it includes a bunch of optional rules from a number of different sources. It includes stuff from the TSR games. When TSR bought SPI, they continued publishing some titles throughout the early 80s. So some of those from the TSR releases in the series. Then there's stuff that was added by DG later on. 7 Days Battles, Atlantic Campaign. So from different games, there were different optional rules for the system developed over the years. And it's pretty cool because it tells you where each of the optional rules came from. But what it allows you to do is kind of pick and choose what you actually want to use for your particular game. So you can use as many or as few of these optional rules as you want to. And then it goes even further, and there's a bunch of variant rules. And so these are variant rules that were introduced in Moves magazine and Strategy and Tactics magazine over the years after the original release of these games. And so this was pretty cool too, because there's a whole new brigade level variant for the Cemetery Hill battle that you can do. And the same thing here. This tells you where these are from and at what point. And again, you can pick and choose what you want to include and what you don't. So most of these I did not actually use, but I did pick. And now there's initiative rules. I did end up picking here are the expanded rules for the blue and gray that includes a new combat results table and leaders. It includes the rules for leaders, as well as these. With the new CRT, you get an attacker defender shattered, this new combat result. And so I think, though, and then the tables here, I ended up, you can download these rules online, so I ended up printing out a card with the CRT on it, so I wouldn't have to keep opening the rule book or flipping back to this page of the rule book, because this is the main CRT you're going to use. And this includes all of the attacker defender shattered results that you can get, as well as adding a 3-2 combat results table, which the other CRT did not have. And so I think this creates a more Civil War appropriate CRT, since the original CRT developed was for Napoleonic era games. And so my general experience with this CRT was pretty good. There was a wide variety of outcomes that you can get, and the leader, and adding the leader rules to it really kind of showed the strength of leader attacks on this CRT, because when you attack with a leader, you can shift either one up or one down on the CRT. And so generally you want to roll low on the CRT. That's where the good results are on a 2d6 roll. But occasionally there's some beneficial results for the attacker kind of sprinkled in at the higher rolls. And so your ability to shift one up or one down on the die roll result with your leader allows you to kind of find those. If you're attacking with a stack with a leader, allows you to find those good results on the higher die rolls, which I was able to utilize a lot with the Union, which generally did more attacking in this game, although the sticky Zocs in this and mandatory adjacent combat means that the Confederates and sometimes the Union were frequently having to attack at poor odds because they had not, through the course of Union advances after combat and Confederate retreats, they'd ended up still adjacent to enemy units at the start of their movement phase. And in this game, you cannot move out of Ezocs. You can't. So, but you have to attack anything that's adjacent to you. So if you end the enemy's previous combat phase adjacent to like 3 different enemies, you can't go anywhere. You have to attack those 3 different enemies. So then you have to start pulling units up. You have to start moving guys up to try and reduce the horrible odds that you're suddenly facing. So it takes some thought, and it's one of those games where you're really crunching numbers on your lines, trying to figure out where you can bring the most odds to bear. It really brings the power of flanking into play. And in this game, I got rolling with the Union pretty early and ended up with some very good die rolls for the Union early on, and the Confederates kind of never recovered from that. They ended up with a lot of shattered units early on, and a shattered unit with the optional attacker defender shattered rules, and you can see lots of guys have shattered down there. It means that they're half strength of the printed value on their counter. So they're not, in this case, like flipped to the combat ineffective. They're actually reduced by strength by half. They can still attack, they're just not as effective. Now, what I think I did wrong was that the sort of designer notes about the attacker defender shattered edition mentioned that even worse is the game's optional disorder rule, which prohibits the unit from attacking or entering an Ezoc after it suffers an attack or retreat result. So I think what this was supposed to do was I was not supposed to use that attack effectiveness, combat effectiveness, attack effectiveness option. I think Attacker Defender Shattered was meant to replace this. So I don't think I was supposed to use this. And so I think an attacker retreats just meant that they would retreat instead of me flipping the counters, which I ended up doing throughout the game. So I'm not sure what ultimate impact that may have had. It was probably worse for the Confederates because they were getting more, they were having to do those poor odds attacks more frequently because they were the ones getting pushed back. So the Union was able to move around and coordinate their attacks more, and the Confederates adopting a more defensive posture meant that I was trying to create a defensive line with them as opposed to looking for attacks. So I was doing fewer attacks at different points with the Confederates, but when if they would end up getting attack or retreat from those poor odds attacks that I was forced to launch by guys that were stuck adjacent to each other, it meant that they frequently ended up with the inability to attack at all, which I think shouldn't have been the case if I was playing without that rule, but just using the Attacker and Defender Shattered rules. Regardless, it was, I ended up fairly early on. So the other thing I did, that was another thing here in these optional rules, in the leader rules, there was a whole section on using those rules at Antietam. And ordinarily in the Antietam, like the original Antietam game back here, you can just move 10 units per turn with the Army of the Potomac, meaning you're extremely limited in the number of units you can attack with, but you can still move different corps and everything. What this does is creates an order of battle where you've got your leaders of your different corps for the Union, and there's some errata you can see that I've penciled in here for starting hexes and stuff. And then the Confederate Army is the same way. They've got certain units that report to certain leaders. Same there. So for the Union, what you end up doing is you take 16, you take 16 blank counters. So I've got a big thing full of spare blank counters over there from all the games I've collected over the years. So I just threw together a bunch of blank counters, and you stick them in here with the Union command, the Union leader chits for the different corps. And until you draw a corps, you can't move them on the map. So you can see there are a bunch of guys still over here. These guys are all frozen. I never drew their activation or their leader counters, so they could never move. So that was the 2nd and the 5th corps. It's kind of amazing that I drew the 6th corps, the 12th corps, and the 9th corps, and the cav. And that was 4. You've got 10 turns, and you've got, 20 counters? 20. How many corps are there, and how many leaders are there? You got, Hooker you can move. So the 1st corps is Hooker's corps. You can move that at the start of the turn. They start here. They're the ones that launch the attack on the morning of the battle. But you've got Sumner, Porter, Franklin, Burnside, and Mansfield. So you've got 5 plus the cavalry is 6. So what is that? 16 and 6. So you've got 22 counters that you're drawing from out of there. But there's only 10 turns in the game. So, and you're only drawing that once a turn. So you could end up drawing just nothing but blank counters. Like you may never be able to activate more than Hooker's corps the whole game. So I actually think I got pretty lucky that I drew as many counters as I did. Like at the 6th corps and the 12th corps, which were pretty big, beefy corps that I was able to get. And 12th corps starts right here. They're the ones that hit the sunken road later in the morning of the battle. And then the 6th corps comes on over here, and I just marched them all the way down, and they ended up joining in the attack with the 1st corps and the 12th corps. And then towards the end of the game, I think maybe on turn 6 or 7, I activated Burnside's corps. And by this point, my artillery had actually bombarded the Confederates off of the bridge space, and I ended up moving into here anyway because they could double their their defense if Burnside came across the bridge. But I also used this ford here. By this point, I'd pulled the Confederate units this way to try and stop the attack of the 6th Corps and the 1st Corps and eventually the 12th Corps. But and one of the reasons I did that was because I was very aggressive with the Confederates early on, because I thought, you know what? There's so many counters in here. There's 16 blank counters in here. Like, the odds are good that the Union may never get to activate anything, or maybe one other corps, like the whole game, because there's only 10. Again, there's only 10 turns, and so I thought if I could hit hard with the Confederates early on, then potentially, like, they could just destroy the entire 1st Corps before any other corps could come online. It didn't work out that way because I made some disastrous rolls with the Confederates early on, and once they were in this sort of attack ineffective, and again, I think if I hadn't been playing with the attack effectiveness rule, if I'd just been using the shattered rule, I might have had more success with them, because there was probably a few instances where I didn't attack where I could have. So that may have been a difference. I mean, ultimately, most of the Confederate Army was destroyed. You can see all the eliminated units there compared to the mild numbers of eliminated Union units. And the final victory points was something like 130 victory points, or 120 victory points to 35 or something. Yeah, 35, which was a decisive victory for the Union. But I may have had more success early on, or been able to eliminate more 1st Corps units, because even by the end of the game, like, the 1st Corps was still going strong over here. I think I may have lost. I did lose more 1st Corps units than any others, but the 1st Corps was big and fighting throughout the battle. Although you can see here, there's only 3 Confederate units left on the board, but this one here was A.P. Hill's corps that shows up at the end. You can see it's a 16. It's huge. It shows up, I think, on turn 7, and but it's way down here, so he has to march, all the way into town. So by the time he got here, it was already over. But I just launched him right into Sharpsburg, and so on the very last attack of the game, turn 10, Confederate turn, he's surrounded. I had something like 42 points of Union troops in all these spaces surrounding him, but in the town space, they're doubled, so he was a 32 in the town space, so it was 47 to 32, which was still a 1-to-1 attack. So I ended up rolling a defender retreat roll on the 1-to-1 table, so I think I rolled a 7. But I couldn't, if I was going to shift, you can shift one up or one down, because I had Hooker or Mansfield, or I think I had multiple leaders there. But you could get one shift for having a leader attacking. But you can see here with a 7, if I shifted to a 6 and its attacker retreat, shifted to an 8, it's an attacker shattered. So I couldn't shift. So I was stuck with a defender retreat. Well, if you can't actually retreat, if you're using the shattered rules, if you can't retreat, then whatever happens just becomes one step worse. So instead of a defender retreat, since he couldn't retreat because he was effectively surrounded at the time, it doesn't look that way now, but I'll get to that in a second, he just becomes shattered. So that reduced him to an 8. But now he's still surrounded by enemy units. So that was the end of the Union turn, and of turn 10, and now we go to the Confederate turn. Well, he's surrounded. He can't move. You can't leave an Ezok once you're in it, but you have to attack everybody who's adjacent to you. So now he was going to have to attack all of these hexes, which on the defensive are doubled, which meant it would have been 8 points attacking. What did I say? He had 47 points, so it would have been 94, 8 to 94. Well, obviously that's well off the charts here. So he's rolling on the 1-to-5 table. Well, what did I roll? Snake Eyes. So Snake Eyes is the only result on the 1-to-5 table that benefits the attacker, and it's a defender retreat. So these 8 points of A.P. Hill forced the entire Union army basically to retreat out of all of those hexes because it applies to all the defenders, and he was attacking every defending hex. So I think I played that right. I think, when you're attacking at this level, or when you're attacking, when you're surrounded by that, you have to attack everybody. And I think the results apply to everybody, even though they're all in different hexes. So that's the way I read it. So the Union army did not end up taking Sharpsburg. Had they controlled all 4 hexes of Sharpsburg, that would have given them 15 victory points. They still had enough, obviously, to get a completely decisive victory, but just a bizarre ending to the game, to to have, because it wasn't even 1 to 5 odds, it was 1 to 40 odds or whatever it was. Or I guess it was 8 times 8. It was, in that range. So 1 to 9, 1 to 10 almost. Yeah, because it was over 80 points defending because they were double in defense. So it was like 1 to 8 or 1 to 9. But yeah, so just a bizarre ending to the game. But ultimately, with the chit pulls, I ended up kind of how things went historically. I think historically, by the end of the day, McClellan had committed all but 2 of his corps. Might have even been all but one corps, because I think the 2nd Corps was committed. I don't think the 5th Corps was committed, and I don't remember if the 6th Corps, maybe the 5th and 6th both were not committed at the end of the day, but it was either 1 or 2 corps that he had left uncommitted by the end of the battle. So regardless, it came out kind of historical in what I was able to control, but I don't think that would be normal. I think you could end up pulling nothing but blank chits until, the game's almost over. And by that point, the Confederates could have completely destroyed the 1st Corps. But I wasn't able to do that here. Part of the problem is that the Confederates have generally weaker units. And so especially if, they're on the rough terrain, that is doubled for the defenders. So, and there's, lots of strategically placed little rough hills here. And those help the Union just as much as they do the Confederates at the start. But you can see, like, here's Dunkard Church and Sunken Road. I mean, the Union just steamrolled the Confederates right into Sharpsburg. I mean, again, it took the whole game. This was by the last turn the Union was closing in on Sharpsburg. So it wasn't like they just romped their way to Sharpsburg and the Confederates turned it into a fortress or something. It was a long, slow grind to get there. But the damage to the Confederate army was just, unrecoverable. So it's an interesting system. I do, like I said, it's a very nice package that Decision Games has put together, largely because they've got just a wealth of optional and variant rules in here for you to explore. And there's, lots of different stuff. There's intelligence rules, dummy counters. There's specific cavalry rules you can use. There's specific artillery rules you can use. There's command and control rules that you can use, which I didn't even get into. So lots of little ways to tinker with the system and pick and choose what you want to do, even like a bombardment table as opposed to, with pins and stuff. Like, I didn't use any of that stuff, which would have added a lot of chrome and, richness to this. Because otherwise it is, a bog standard, basic CRT, harsh results. Either everybody dies or everybody retreats, or they exchange, or you exchange. So, and, you can lose big, giant counters. I mean, one of the big Confederate counters here is this, is Walker's brigade. That's a big 10. It's easily the largest Confederate unit on the board until A.P. Hill shows up towards the end of the game. But, if you get an exchange, say this guy is attacking at like 3 or even 4 to 1 odds, or 5 to 1, say, if he was attacking at 2 or something, but gets a bad result, ends up getting an exchange result. I don't know if you could get you can get an exchange on the 5 to 1. So, well, the Union loses a 2, but he has to lose this 10 if that's the only unit attacking. So just a brutal, brutal CRT, just very old school in that regard. But you can, again, you can tinker with it with all of these optional rules that they put in here. So this is a real nice touch by Decision to do that. They could have very easily just reprinted, errata and all, the old SPI versions or TSR versions of these games, and just not given a shit, which has frequently been, a DG standard operating procedure is not giving a shit, in terms of graphics and just they're dull, those dishwater graphics and graphic design for their games. But this one, not only did they, put a lot of thought and care into putting all these optional and variant rules together like this, they actually, this is, it's a decent looking game as well. They kept the kind of Redmond Simonson map style, but modernized the graphics a little bit. There's some coloration and texture and stuff compared to just the plain old cream and green and typical SPI map era. But they've still got kind of the gray. They've still got the kind of font that the old SPI maps used, which is pretty cool. They've got the CRTs on the map. Those are nice touches. And you can see these are mounted boards, which is also nice. You can see the map here kind of curved over, because I think on the flip side of this is the Hooker and Lee map, and that actually joins to one of the other map boards in the box. So, but yeah, the compass rose, very SPI era there. So they've kept some of those the fond SPI designs, and then otherwise it's some normal cards, but nice thick, it's the nice thick counters, with simple graphics on them, simple markers that all look kind of uniform. Got a couple of turn trackers or victory point trackers and stuff. So just the production quality is very good for a DG game, better than some of their more recent releases in more recent years. So I think they are taking steps to improve things. I know, like the Battles in the East series that I've got there, that's pretty nice compared to something like, you can see Desert Fox Deluxe there, which was, compared to the Battles in the East's production quality, or this Balloon Grey Deluxe production quality is not nearly as good, in my opinion. So, and that's, the Desert Fox Deluxe is maybe 5 years old now. But it is, yeah, they've definitely improved in recent years, and I definitely enjoyed this, and I look forward to playing more of the games in here and picking some more of the variant and optional rules in here as well, and testing those out on some of the other titles in here. So definitely been entertaining. If you do have a chance to pick this up, I would recommend it. If you like that kind of old school gaming, while there are lots of variants and optional rules in here, it is still, part of this old school type of system with the EZOCs. There's no rules in there that I'm aware of that change, like the EZOC, the harshness of the EZOC functions. There's nothing that substantially changes the CRT beyond this. So, and this is still a pretty punishing CRT, even though it's got, it added a 3-2 column, and it has a different, the attacker and defender shattered results in there. But it is still a simplified system. This is not a heavily detailed system. It's not as complex as something like the Brigade series from the Gamers, or Line of Battle, or Great Campaigns, or stuff like that. But probably more akin to like the Worthington Games old school game series Civil War titles over there, which are probably the closest to this, just in terms of simplicity and ease of play. And again, it's their old school games line, and it's old school for a reason, because it's this kind of very simplified CRT, simple ZOC and movement rules, and that's it. So anyway, check it out if you get a chance.